evening, and how are you, Jim?
Doing well, Sandy. How are you?
Good.
Good to be
I'm
back.
I'm here. Yeah, it's been 2 weeks, but I liked it and it was fun. And welcome Jim Massa from Science Talk, Jim, Alaskan Jim with the interesting stories, but Jim who I think knows some shit. So welcome. As people join us, if you're on Facebook, if you could share, that would be great. So tonight we're going to talk about the atmosphere. We're going to talk about atmospheric CO2 and the causes of CO2, different the natural process with plants and where carbon sinks are, and I think it should be a really interesting show. Probably stuff a lot of people with us, some stuff that you do know about the environment and learning about processes and climate change. So welcome.
Thank you, and good to
Okay.
be back with you again.
It is. It is. So when we were talking about this topic, it just so happens you have a video that you had done, a recent video, and I think we're going to discuss your video, but we're going to start with a little bit of the what the heck with the carbon and the CO2. People are joining us from Facebook, and we need a little background educating. Hi, chat. All right, go for it, Jim. It's you're up.
Okay, well, recent the measurements over at Mauna Loa in Hawaii have now pegged CO2 at 414 with a 0.38 ppms, which continues to go up and up and up,
Up and up.
and which is due to humans burning fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, oil. And so people have often asked, what is it about CO2 that is such a heat trapping molecule? I'm not a quantum chemist. If you want to ask a quantum chemist, Angela Merkel, the chancellor of Germany, she has a PhD in quantum chemistry.
She does, doesn't
Seriously,
she? Yeah,
yeah, she does. I mean,
a
it's like
scientist.
yeah, she's a smart one. But it's when you look at what comprises the atmosphere, 79% is nitrogen, N2. Then you have
Okay.
oxygen gas, O2. Then you've got a whole bunch of trace gases, some trace noble gases, so-called noble gases, argon, xenon, that kind of stuff. It's when you get to the molecules that contain more than one element that it gets interesting. CO2, N2O, CH4, methane, and then of course H2O, water vapor. It's the way the atoms bond up together in the covalent bond. They form these interesting angles.
Covalent
It is
bonds.
something about how those angles, and I'm not an expert on this, but it's something, my understanding is how those angles form, that when the sunlight energy comes in and there's the irradiation off the surface, somehow the way those molecules are geometrically shaped, there's an interaction with the radiation.
Ah.
You know, and more so than with the N2 or the O2, the basic diatomic one element, the molecules. So that's very interesting. You've heard the thing that that methane is a more powerful greenhouse gas. It doesn't persist as long in the atmosphere as CO2 does. Well, methane has CH4, so it's a total of 5 atoms comprising that molecule versus CO2, which is 3 atoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it comes down to the kind of bond and the angles between the atoms and how they interact. That's my understanding of it. But
Well, let me ask you this, Jim. So, to the layperson who's saying, well, okay, so CO2 is great for plants and it's so natural and how could it possibly be causing climate change? And let's have the why is CO2 such a problem, Jim?
Well, because of what I just described, it traps the heat,
Yeah.
and now, yes, people say, "Oh, plants will suck down the CO2." The
Mhm.
problem now is there's several problems, and involve the physiology of the plants. Basically, plants, like any organism, they have preferred temperature ranges,
Yep.
and if it starts getting too warm, the plants don't like it. They start withering. And when you look at the plants that comprise what humans basically eat, they're all what we call C3 plants. Now, it refers to a three-carbon compound that forms within the whole Krebs cycle, all those crazy biochemistry stuff that goes on. The only crop that humans utilize that is not a C3 plant, that's a C4 plant, is corn. And corns can do better in more arid, warmer places. Basically, C3 plants are plants that adapt well to temperatures less than 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and they can handle humid conditions.
Oh.
C4 plants adapt to warm, very warm conditions in the 90s and 100s, and very dry conditions as opposed to the more humid conditions for the C3s. So now you have the other issue that if a C3 plant is being too warm, the stomata, which are the openings under the leaves from which
Mhm.
gas exchange occurs, will stay open more so, and therefore there's what's called transpiration, which is water vapor out the stomata. So these plants then lose water, part of the reason why they wither. So warmer temperatures for the C3 plants, the great majority of plants that humans rely on, do not do well in these increasing hot temperatures and as well as dry conditions. And I've done videos exploring that topic. I've got more coming down the pipe, but that's basically what's going on. Even the plants don't like it warm because the CO2 makes it warmer. They can't absorb it.
Wow. I know this. I know these things, but not everybody that's with us understands, I think, the processes. And sometimes it's just good to go over, even as rudimentary as it seems. And why, I mean, yes, this is going to sound silly, but we're burning everything that we burn. So why is it so bad to burn? And what happens to all that crap that goes into the atmosphere? What happens to it?
You have chemical reactions that take place. See, here's the thing, okay? What a lot of people forget to mention, what they exclude, you burn a fossil fuel, oh, we're putting CO2 in the atmosphere. But we're also putting water vapor in the atmosphere. Whenever you take an alkane, which is what gasoline is, it's an alkane, which is all the carbon atoms are single bonded to every other carbon atom. When you burn an alkane, combust it, two products result: carbon dioxide and water vapor. And just look at a tailpipe. You see drip, 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 drip. That's the water vapor. Well, now it's condensed, but that's the water that's condensing, dripping out. So, and water vapor is a very big greenhouse gas. So you're putting
Yeah.
up both CO2 and H2O. And studies have actually looked at how they work in tandem. And they've actually found that when you have CO2 and water vapor side by side, it's more potent than CO2 by itself.
Wow. So
So we're adding water vapor as well as CO2. And, let's face
then
it,
what
what's a
happens?
cloud? Cloud's water vapor.
Okay, a cloud is water vapor. So we're adding clouds. So are airplanes, but we're adding clouds now. But if somebody was listening to our talk, the show, and didn't know anything about this topic, why would you say that CO2 is a bad thing?
Because it is trapping heat, and we're increasing the levels, the ppms, parts per million, in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So we're which there's more CO2 available to trap more heat energy, conjunction with the water vapor in places where that happens. So we're trapping more of the heat energy, and we're creating the situation that a lot of places are going to become inhospitable, intolerable to live in. The Middle East is now projected to be totally uninhabitable within 30, 40 years because it's just getting so hot there. Keep in mind also that humans really did our great advancements, if you will, uh, when CO2 levels were 280 parts per million.
Yeah.
And now we have 414. So that is
414, which was
an
on.
increase 134 parts per million.
Yeah, there it is. Mauna Loa, 414.
And that's what, basically, 150, 180 years since the start of the Industrial Revolution. That is a huge amount that put in the atmosphere. But don't forget, a lot of that CO2 we've burnt off has been absorbed by the ocean. Not everything we burned off has gone in the atmosphere. A lot has gone in the oceans, and now you have the acidification issue with the oceans. You've got the ocean absorbing that gas, absorbing the heat energy as well. Is
making a mess of things.
It's getting a little crazy out there is what it is.
Getting a little crazy out there. Yeah. So the heat's trapped. We're trapped, essentially. We're trapped. But, I wanted also to segue to your AMO discussion, where you can get into some meat and potatoes. But if you want to explain to everybody what that was, this was CO2 101.
Yeah.
Just wanted to do a CO2 101, but we're going to get into some meat and potatoes now. But for you vegans, it's not going to have any meat.
Before we move on, want to mention that recent studies have shown that through various analytical techniques, including isotopic fractionation, that they've been able to identify the sources of the CO2 in the atmosphere, whether it's biogenic, whether it's volcanism, or whether it's anthropogenic. And this particular study that I looked at and I discussed, they looked at the difference between anthropogenic and volcanism. And get the numbers precisely off the top of my head, but basically they've been able to discern the fact that when you look at the total amount of CO2 put into the atmosphere by volcanoes, then compare that to what humans have put into the atmosphere, the amount put into the atmosphere by humans is 40 to 100 times more than what volcanoes have put into the atmosphere. So it's definitely telling us that humans really are the main driver of CO2 being put into the atmosphere.
There you go. I swapped us. Well, you see, and that's what I really wanted to get at here for, people that are joining our channel and that may not understand the process. I know, of course, a lot that are with us do, but it's always good to go over those kinds of things, Jim, I think, and bring new people into the science of climate change and the learning about climate change.
Well, this is true, and the thing that I'm always stressing, and this point cannot be made strongly enough, is that because you're going to get people saying, well, the climate has changed before in the past. Right. Yes, it has. That's very true. Mm-hmm. But what you have to do is you have to look at, when it changed in the past, the length of time it took to change. We're talking, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. We have done this in a couple of centuries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the time scale is dramatically shrunk. So the point that people need to bear in mind is the rate of change. That is the critical aspect. It's the rate of change. And the rate of change is so steep that organisms are not being given enough time to adapt.
Right.
Part of the reason that's leading to mass extinction.
Human beings won't adapt either.
No, they won't. They're not.
Well, let's segue into AMO.
On that cheery note.
On that cheery
Okay.
note. Oh, gosh. It's not a funny
AMO.
laughing matter.
No, it's not. But otherwise, if you didn't at least
Oh.
laugh a little bit, we go like insane.
Poppy
We-
Davis just said, listen, this is good, Jim. This is good. My husband is watching with me, and Climate Change 101 is awesome. All right. That's great. Okay, let's have a party. Yay.
This is why sometimes, even if it doesn't get very many views, I'll just put up a paleontological video just to keep my own sanity. It's
Oh,
just-
yes. A paleontological radio. Okay. Okay. So, Jim,
So,
segue.
AMO.
AMO.
Not to
And
be
then you
confused
tell
with
me.
AMOC.
Right. We don't confuse it with AMOC like I did already. But
no,
I
no,
have.
that's-
You just tell me all of the slides. Just say, Sandy, put up this slide. I'm letting Jim
So,
go on this one.
a lot of people I'm sure most people are familiar with AMOC, which is an acronym that means the Atlantic Meridional Overturned Circulation. And that's basically what happens in the North Atlantic. The warm Gulf Stream goes up there, gives off its heat. It's now cold and salty water. It sinks vertically, what we call a thermohaline circulation. And then thus begins what is colloquially called the conveyor belt. That's AMOC. And I discussed that numerous times, made many videos on that, discussed that on other programs, platforms, and so forth. AMO is the Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation. It is a oscillation that basically looks at changes in the sea surface temperature over time. That's primarily what it looks at. And sea surface temperature we refer to as SST, and doesn't mean the supersonic transport like the Concorde or whatever, but sea surface temperature. And what they've found basically on the measurement, and there's just a little bit of debate within the community if this cycle is really there. My view is that the evidence indicates there is a cycle that takes place on the order of decades. And basically, it goes from what's called the negative phase or a cool phase, and then it goes into the positive or the warm phase. So I don't know if you can show that slide that shows the
Sure
Atlantic
can.
Ocean.
All right. One of the graphics?
Yeah.
The one or number two?
I don't know the numbering. I just know it had like AMO positive and AMO negative on it on the two different slides.
All right, so there's negative and then there's
Whichever one you
positive.
put up first doesn't matter. We'll put
Okay,
the other one up.
I'm pretty sure this is AMO negative. And I'm going to make it bigger so everybody can see it without locking it. All right, let's go. It's up. All right.
Okay, waiting for it to. I'm waiting to get a visual on it.
Yeah, I know. We have a very big lag.
There we
We
go.
do.
Okay, that looks like the negative, where you can see a lot of the Atlantic Ocean, save for a spot in the Caribbean that is has cooler sea surface temperature waters. That would be what's a typical AMO in the negative or cool phase. And yeah, so that's the negative phase. That's the cool phase. And
I got the
you can see.
positives up.
So now the positive should come up next.
Yeah,
think.
it looks good too. You can I mean, how as good as, things that are scary can look.
Okay, I'm waiting for it to show up here. But
It
what we'll
will.
see in the what we'll see in the positive or the warm phase is almost a flip flop between. There we go. It's basically a flip flop between what was warm and what was cool. The kind of reverse. But you can see in this one here that so much of the Atlantic has warm sea surface temperature conditions. That's the warm positive phase, which has been the situation for the last 20 or so years.
Okay.
So that's showing an overview of what's going on in the ocean. Now, if we want to look at the calculated indices,
I got that
okay,
one. Yes, sir.
let's
Yeah, that's
let's
got
look.
the AMO index, right? The warm
Yeah,
phase
let's go
and the
with that one next.
transition phase and the cool phase and the yeah, this is an interesting one. I want to hear about this one. Definitely. All right, guys, it should be up. I'm so sorry that we have such a lag, but that's what happens.
Well,
And you're in
this is a good way to
Alaska.
measure. Yeah, this is a good way to measure the speed of light, by the way.
Or the speed, yeah, speed of
The time it
internet.
takes the signal bounce up and down.
I hear you.
Okay, when you look at that, you can see the warm phase, and that's like in the 1930 to 62 or so, transitioning in the early mid 60s into the cool phase that lasted into basically the late 80s, then a transitioning back to almost the close of basically to the mid 90s, and now we've just been in this warm phase uh, since then. So I like that shows what's going on, and if you look at that, you can see that there is a cycle. There's a bit of an oscillation to it. Now the jagged up and down is going to reflect seasonal variations. Winter, spring, that kind of
Yep.
stuff. So you're going to get the seasonal variations. But if you were to fit a smooth curvilinear fit through that, you would get something that would indicate an oscillatory nature, so, some cyclical nature to it is what that would indicate.
Thank you,
So,
Jim.
a, so if we can maybe show the one that says AMO annual,
Okay, where is it? I don't know if I have
that
indices.
would show the
Oh, the
actual
ind
calculated
is that the
values.
one annual? It says annual STD. The
That
annual
is the one.
STD. Okay, well that's up. That's an interesting one. I see that. It's measuring all the years, and you'll see it. Transitions.
Yep. Um, I mean, you can on the one we just showed, you can see the numbers on the side, but I don't. They're probably not going to be large enough for the audience to see. So on
Oh,
this one here, when you look at the left side of the graph, you can clearly see the values. So what we're
yes,
looking at is the values on the vertical scale is the calculated index. And if it's in the negative, that is in the negative phase, hence negative, right? That's the cool phase. And if it's in the positive realm, that's the positive phase, and that's the warm phase. And you can see, uh, this is basically the same graph that we just looked at, but now you can see where it was positive, then transition to negative, transition back to positive, and so on. Now, what's interesting, we have information up to 2010. I have seen some data that indicates that from 2010 to the present, and I think it's calculated up to 2018. They're still working on the calculating the index for the last couple of years, and of course this year is still ongoing. But the positive values were actually approaching close to 2.5. So we're seeing some of the highest positive values on the AMO, which is reflective of warmer sea surface temperature, which is
which
reflective
is
of oceanic water absorbing sunlight energy. And when you remember, keep in mind the specific heat of water is a very high value. It takes a lot of energy to heat up water, to heat up
yeah.
1 kilogram of water 1 degree Celsius.
And that's what heats the oceans. That's what's bringing on stronger storms from the heat. Uh, can you talk about a little bit about that process?
Sure. Maybe we can put up the hurricane, uh,
Okay,
and that one
gotcha.
that shows really, it's not a perfect fit. Very few things in science are, but
Mm-hmm.
when I look at this graph and I look at the last 2, 3 decades or so, that that to me is extremely telling. So, uh, waiting for the electron beams to get down to me. There we go. Okay, so the the hurricane counts, which is a 5-year average, that's in green, and then you have the AMO to 5-year average, that's in blue. And overall, the impression a person looking at this would say it tracks fairly closely. It actually did not track too strongly during the cold phase, which is interesting. But when it gets into the warm phase, it tracks almost really very well. Not perfect, of course, but it tracks very, very well. And basically, it makes sense. If you have warmer oceanic conditions, warmer sea surface temperature, we know that warm water really helps fuel hurricanes. And we've been seeing this. And now, when you take into account that the calculated value through this current decade is approaching 2.5, and we're seeing what? We're seeing much stronger storms. I mean, look at Laura that just hit Louisiana. That went from a Cat 1 to a Cat 5 in like 3 hours. That's like unheard of. It just picked up all that warmth in the Caribbean and the Gulf, and
Yeah.
just
And now
became a very strong storm.
the people in Louisiana, there's not a lot out there, but they need help. It's a mess. And it's going to
In fact,
continually, but it wasn't as bad as Houston because it didn't hit as a populated area, as much of a populated area. Did you want me to put that
so
back up?
I was just wondering, Katrina, was that what, 05, 06 when it hit?
15, was it 15 years ago? I think it was 15 years ago.
Yeah,
Ooh.
if you look at that hurricane one there, it's almost, it happens right about at one of those little peaks there in the AMO positive values when Katrina hit.
Oh yeah, look at that. It's high too. Oh my.
Yeah. So it, so they're using the AMO part of the cycle along with the calculated index values to help. That's part, not the only thing, but that's part of what goes into when you get the weather folks there, the basically making their hurricane forecasts. What kind of hurricane season will it be. That's one of the analytical tools that they're using in their forecasting. Not the only one,
Okay.
but one of
One of
them.
them. One in the arsenal that and Nicholas he does that. Snork says don't forget uh the Cat 4 equivalent derecho that wiped out Iowa that isn't making the news. Not much. No.
Yeah, in fact, let's see what. Okay, yeah, yeah. I think Michael Mann was just talking about that recently about Derico. Um, I forget what context, but yeah, it's
That we're not used to this stuff.
right.
Context. Yeah.
more
Yeah.
more atmospheric, crazy stuff going on. But
Mhm.
I mean, when you think about it, what energy is driven ultimately by the sun, and when you start having these drastic gradient is when you're going to start driving a lot of these things. But on the flip side of it, with the Arctic warming so much, the temperature gradients from mid low latitudes to high latitudes is actually lessening, especially in the summertime. So then that's now affecting jet streams, and how jet streams move about affects storm paths. And the jet streams are now, instead of sticking in more of a zonal flow, they're more meridional, which means zonal flow is basically sticking at a latitude. Meridional is the ups and downs, so you're going
Got it.
longitudinally.
Mhm.
And so when you have that, You can then bring what we call the Pineapple Express. You can bring warm air up into Alaska.
Uh,
You can then bring cooler air down into into Delaware. That kind of stuff.
you know how
And
you were answering that guy today? He calls himself Pete. His name is Brian. He always sends videos complaining about Ireland or Scotland being
oh
cold.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Can you
yeah. That
explain that? Maybe he's here with us.
I'll get to that in a moment.
Okay,
I just want
I
to finish my
interrupted.
thought. I want to finish my thought on what I was talking about the jet stream, because the gradient is not as strong, which means the temperature gradient is weaker. It means the pressure gradient is weaker, which means the flow will be weaker and slower. That's why you get a storm like Harvey did. It just parks itself and just keeps pissing away on Houston, because the
Yeah.
storms are moving so slow. So they stall, they just move slow, and they can put a lot of precipitation onto whatever's down below them. As to Scotland and Ireland being cold, well, here's the interesting thing about that. And this will probably, um, this may sound almost counterintuitive. It's because of global warming. Well, what's happening is we're melting Greenland like you would not believe. So what's happening? We're putting a chunk load of fresh water into the North Atlantic. Remember, the Gulf Stream flows up there. That's warm, salty water. It gives off its heat. It gives off its heat, which keeps those little islands called the UK milder, Scandinavia milder. As it gives off its heat, it becomes cold, salty water, which is the densest. Density of seawater depends on temperature and salt content. The colder the temperature, more dense. The more salt content, the more dense. So you have cold, salty water. It's just going to sink.
Right.
As the water vertically sinks, it pulls the Gulf Stream up to the north. It pulls it with it, so that the Gulf Stream can keep giving off its heat. Well, now if you're throwing all this fresh water on the surface, the water is no longer as dense. It's not going to sink as readily. So it doesn't sink as readily, and there's been research teams that have measured the slowdown. Teams out of Dalhousie University in Halifax, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, Norwegian researchers have measured the slowdown in what we call the deep water formation. We actually call it some chimney formation. That's another thing. Well, oceanographers just having a bit of fun, but
Okay.
but the point is that this thermal haline circulation is slowing down. Well, if the sinking is slowing, you know what that means? It's not going to pull the Gulf Stream as readily. The Gulf Stream is slowing, so now
Yeah.
that warmth is not going to reach Ireland and Scotland
And
and the
that's why he's
Scandinavian
always
places.
getting rain.
So that's what's happening. And when you look at worldwide maps, that region tends to be a little on the cooler side. Not always, but tends to be. Then you have to also consider what phase is the North Atlantic Oscillation in, because that has a direct impact on what goes on in that region of the planet. And then the North Atlantic Oscillation works with the Arctic Oscillation. It gets a little. So what's now happening is that the warmth is that the Gulf Stream normally brings is staying more mid-latitude, keeping those places warmer.
Mm-hmm.
It's not getting up to that region, so that region is going to start cooling down. That's basically what's going on, because the Gulf Stream, along with the conveyor belt, is really a heat distribution mechanism for the planet. And Wally Broker, the late Wally Broker, demonstrated that when AMOC slows down or stops, the planet, the heat distribution becomes extremely unequal, and depending on what part of the Milankovitch
Yeah.
orbital cycles you're in, ice ages can result. So I'm actually one of those oceanographers that is of the opinion that global warming will eventually, like in about 1,000, 1,500 years from now, lead us into the beginnings of an ice age.
Wow. That's
And
wild.
the reason why I say 1,000, 1,500 years from now is because of the thermal energy, the thermal inertia that's already in the system. it's going to take, the latest modeling is indicating it's going to take about 1,000 years for that to dissipate. If we stop burning fossil fuels now, if we continue to do so, all bets are off.
Well, humans, who knows what will be here, and that's 1,000, 1,500 years could be absolutely nothing. It's an infinitesimal amount of time in the geologic, calendar. But do you mind if I
You know,
segue
my,
to
my,
to,
my,
to a
my
different
ad is it
question?
could be part of a snail.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. That's a good analogy. Time doesn't move as a snail anymore to me, but here, Jean asks, are places like Sahara Desert getting more rain the hotter it gets?
Well, it's really interesting because one of the general tendencies, and again, I stress general tendencies, is that dry areas will get drier, wet areas will get wetter. And what's happening is that if you have very hot air temperature and there's not a lot of moisture in the air, well, the hotter the air is, the more moisture it can hold. So any moisture that's in the ground is sucked right up into the air, but the levels are so insufficient that precipitative clouds are not likely to form. Whereas if it's very wet, it's already wet, it's warm. The warm air can hold a lot of moisture, but only to a point where it reaches saturation, and then it just comes right back down. And it kind of continues that little bit of a cycle there. There are two schools of thought. There's one that technology will save our bacon, and another one that says technology is nice, but it's not going to save our bacon. I fall into the latter group. So, because, and the reason why I say that is several reasons. I'm not being flippant by any means, but the reason why I say that is very simple: chaos theory. You can never ever predict every possible interactions. You
Yeah,
just
and you
can't.
can never remember to unmute your microphone. I just read that whole thing and nobody heard it.
Oh, oh, oops.
No, oops, but it was up on the screen. It was up on the screen. He saw it. But I'll read it again. The
Okay.
problem is trying to predict technology and how it's applied. That is really difficult. Everything can change across the entire globe in 50 years in those terms. And I got it. Okay, Jim, now that you were so rudely interrupted, you can finish off what you probably forgot now.
So, should I go from the beginning of my reply, or
Whatever you'd like.
okay? Well, okay. As just in case my mic was not working, I never know what happens on this end.
No, it was my
I
end.
sometimes
It
hit
was
buttons. I
it
sometimes
was
hit buttons over here too. It's like, oh, what happened? But
no, it was my
uh,
end.
basically, there are two kind of lines of thinking. One is that technology will save us. Another is technology is nice, but it won't save us. I'm with the latter group because you really don't. You're trying to develop technology to do what? You're not. By the time you develop it, the conditions might have changed that you're trying to address or do what have you, and it comes down to chaos theory. I mean, you just cannot predict all the possible interactions that can happen. Um, all the parameters, you can try and think them through, but there's always some other interactions or combinations of two-way, three-way interactions, four-way interactions that you just can never account for, can never adequately model for. And so, and I think this is where, the folks who are in the former group, or technology will save us, these are the folks who are pushing the geoengineering schemes. And the geoengineering is, stupid. It's just never going to work for all the reasons I just outlined.
Even the remember earlier we were talking about the carbon sequestration, and I saw this video, and it was a techno science geeky guy, but he had it all explained, and every house with their, like, the Jetsons, the solar panels, and every house with their own CO2 carbon eating machine, and recycling carbon. But it has to stop. It's insanity. But I don't know if it will stop, Jim. I think that technology is going to keep going until we're not here anymore.
They'll develop these things which may or may not work on an extreme local place, but not. But I don't see it, when you think of the complexity of atmospheric flows and interactions and movement and etc., you can never really get these things on a global or even hemispheric aspect. So, yes, I mean, I'm not saying, if you want, as far as, if you want to put solar panels on your house, do it by all means. If you want to put a little windmill in your yard to generate some electricity, do it. Okay, and they're improving the windmill technology and shape and so on. They're now finding that you don't have to have the huge three-bladed wind mills that are popular. They're developing smaller ones that actually generate more electricity.
I knew this
as to the carbon, you're basically talking about installing scrubbers, and those are expensive pieces of machinery. It's just like putting up solar panels. The initial outlay is extremely expensive, depending on your system, but you're going to need inductors, you're going to need batteries, you're going to need all these.
I know, I was looking.
And it'll cost you starting around $30,000.
Yeah.
Some systems, and a lot of people don't have $30,000 in their back pocket.
Or they don't want to put their house on the. They don't want to put a lot of people take out home equities. I'm not going to do that. Mm-mm.
Right. Yeah. At this point, I ain't either. So, I mean, it should be that every new house that's built should be basically energy independent and off the grid. That's just my personal opinion. You should not have to rely on a power company to burn piles of coal or gas, what have you, to send power down transmission line where you're going to have power leakage, because that just happens, to feed all these homes. And a residential place should be energy independent.
Okay, that breaks me. That's fine. I mean, I had a guest the other night who was a sustainability expert who taught at a university here in New York, and when you say, like, okay, we should all be off grid. What about the millions of people that live in cities? How do we do that? How do we do sustainable developments? I mean, we're not gone yet. How do we transition?
That's a difficult question, and that's not my area of study, what have you.
Me neither.
I don't know. That's a question left for the sustainability experts, for the civil engineers. Yeah. I mean, you could put these massive systems on the rooftop of apartment buildings, I guess. I mean, that's a starting location. It also depends on where you're at, which city it is. Is it New York City, or is it Des Moines, Iowa?
Des Moines. Yep.
Yep. But there's not going to be a one-fit-all solution. It's going to depend on where you're at as to what's the best way. I mean, if we were in Iceland, tap into the geothermal energy on the ground. And that's what the Icelanders do, by the way. They tap into the geothermal energy to provide electricity, heat, and that kind of stuff.
They're clean in Iceland. Well, I got rich, Diana. Sandy, ask Jim how long he thinks we have before the shit hits the fan. It's kind of hitting the fan, don't you think?
Oh, we're being showered with the shit. You know,
It seems to me.
it's not only hitting the fan, it's being distributed by the fan.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, I mean, it's nothing to laugh about, but
No.
we're already seeing it. I mean, you know, we're looking at the Arctic burning up. We're looking at the sea ice disappearing. We're looking at droughts. We're looking at, you know, fires. Look at California. We're looking at all these devastating storms. We're looking at crop failures. This is happening. You know, and whatever crops are harvested, the nutritional quality has greatly reduced because of, you know, what the warming does to the soil and the plant's ability to uptake the appropriate minerals and so on. So we're seeing that. And rice, which is a major staple for a great majority of people on this planet, the nutritional value of rice is gone down through the basement. It's very alarming. So we're seeing things now. All you have to do is just look at what's going on. So how long do we have? I mean, I can't. I'm not in that kind of predictive business. All I can share with you is what a think tank group out of Australia came up with, and this is a conservative think tank group, and they basically said that if humans continue doing as we're doing now, and then looking at everything that's happening, they're basically saying by 2050, there won't be civilization. Everything will have gone into complete chaos,
Ooh,
into
boy.
complete collapse. You know, by 2050 is what they're saying, and they issued their report before COVID. You know, here's the other thing. Okay, yeah, we got this COVID thing we're dealing with now, in which case right now you can take your U.S. passport and throw it in the trash
Yeah,
because
we
you can't go
can't leave.
anywhere
Nope.
because thanks to Trumpy. But anyway, but
Don't get me started. We're not going there tonight.
we're not going there. Okay.
No,
Yeah, no, we're
I
not going
can't emotionally handle it.
But yeah, it's just we got this pandemic. Well, the permafrost is thawing like you would not believe, and of course, as it thaws, all the methane is being released. But what potential pathogens are lurking in the permafrost that, as it thaws out, hello, we now, you know, are going to be dealing with pathogens that humans have not come in contact with in 40, 50,000 years, if ever.
Yeah.
And you know, and when you get a new pathogen, it does what? It just rip-roars right through the population, leaving a lot of deaths in the wake.
See, and that's what makes me feel for the younger ones because I'm older and I've already made my amends and my peace with what my generation's contribution has been. But then I think I, have a 31-year-old and they can't even leave the country yet. But I mean, they're ready to
Right?
go somewhere.
I
And
would love to be honest.
yeah. Hey, we got an
No,
interesting
seriously, I would
question.
love to get
Oh,
you know,
what?
pick
Oh,
up
out.
stakes and just go and just yeah.
And you're
just
in a
go.
place a lot of people want to go, Alaska. Shit.
It. I probably would have already left the U.S. had I not been living in Alaska for 30 plus years,
Yeah.
and it would pain me to leave it. But the U.S. is, to be blunt, collapsing. The
Oh
U.S.
boy.
is a failed state. Let's just call it what it is. Let's just be blunt and honest about it. It's a failed state, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay. I can't
On that cheery note. On
disagree.
that cheery note. Like,
No, I really can't. I was looking for what do you think about modular micro reactors? Which are modular micro reactors.
nuclear
I don't
reactors, is that
I
what
don't think is this like we were talking about, is this a modular micro reactor for everyone's house? Is that a futuristic or a technical real thing?
I'll be honest. I have no idea
Yeah, I'm
what that's
asking
referring to. I
frustrated
really
atheist that
because
question because he asked the
Because when I
question.
hear modular, I'm thinking like modular homes. Like here's the pre-built walls, stand them up. Here's the pre-built.
Yeah.
It's a modular home. You just slap the modules together. That's where my brain is taking me.
Yeah,
But that's
I'm saying nuclear power plants for your personal property. A nuclear power plant, a micro nuclear power plant in every building in the city. Jeez, who knows? That's a novel in itself, a utopian novel. Oh my,
but you still have to
Scott's.
deal with the radioactive waste at the end of it
Yeah,
all.
really, like
You
everybody's
can't just
dealing with.
exactly. Okay, I've used up this nuclear fuel. I'll just dig a pit in my backyard and toss it in there.
Mm, mm. Oh, salt
It's
reactors. He's talking salt reactors. Okay. Well, I don't think it's our night for salt reactors. I got to bring on a person that is in the field of nuclear energy. That would be an interesting
yeah,
one.
that's definitely out of my area. So yeah.
Okay. So, oh yes, that's right. Environmental. Poppy says that is from the environmental Seattle. That's Carl. Smaller nuclear power plants. Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay.
And there is the waste, and that's
I know a lot of people have been, actually saying that we should consider nuclear power. The problem with that is, putting aside, the size of the unit, but like you take a typical nuclear plant, you have to
Can't say
build these huge things out of concrete. Well, concrete, one of the components of it is cement. Cement is such an intensive greenhouse gas producer. To make cement, you're putting a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. So it's almost self-defeating. In fact, not almost, it is self-defeating.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can't imagine, building a small little thing for a house where you're still not going to need a lot of concrete. You know? But again, I really don't know what comprises these units, so I'm not going to say any more on that.
Okay. Groot wants to know: are they building homes differently now with permafrost melting in Alaska?
Okay. Well, the typical way to construct things here, when in the pioneer days, they didn't know anything about permafrost and slumping and all that kind of stuff. So they just, dig a ground, put in a foundation, whatever, and all of a sudden, it's doing twisty and sinking and stuff like that. I mean, there's a village up above the Arctic Circle called Wiseman, and some of the old cabins from like the turn of the 20th century, you need a ladder to enter the cabin because it's sunk so far down that the top of the
God.
door, like this much of the top of the door above the ground, it's just sunk so much into the ground. The way we build nowadays is you don't dig into the ground, and they used to even just drill holes and put pilings in. Now they're saying don't even do that. The way is that you put down what's called road cloth. It's just fancy tarp, really. You put down road cloth and
Okay.
you put the materials, tailings, rocks, what have you. You put
Uh
the
huh.
materials on top of that and you level it, let it compact down. And then when you build your house, you build up off of that. So you have what's called
Okay.
post and pad. The idea being is that you have a gap of at least 1 to 2 feet minimal between the bottom of your floor joist and in the
Okay.
top of the tailing pad. That's to let air flow through so you whisk away the heat. So that is pretty much how we build things up here now. That's how I
Heat.
built my
It
house.
whisks away heat and moisture. What about it? Does it whisk away moisture by having that
Well,
underneath?
if you have very cold temperatures, there's not going to be
Mm-hmm.
much moisture to begin with. I
Okay.
mean, if you're sitting at 40 below, not a whole lot of
No,
moisture in it.
none.
That's the old joke. It's
Zero.
a dry cold. It's the damp cold that's the problem. It's the dry cold. It's not
It's a
bad.
dry cold. I have never been in minus 40. Okay. I've been in
Well,
minus because I've lived in Buffalo area forever. But no, not that cold.
well, the thing we like to do here is we take like a cup of boiling water like it's like boiling. It's just been boiling, and you go from your house, you run outside like 40, 50 below, and you throw it in the air, and it instantly crystallizes and crackles,
Oh,
and you
jeez.
just see, yeah, it's a pretty cool thing.
Pretty
You
cool
probably can find a
thing.
YouTube video of that.
I'm sure if there's something, anything,
But
it's on YouTube.
this is what we do when we get bored. Well, it's 50 below. I'm stuck in our. Let's boil some water and throw it in the.
It's all right, Jim. It's all right. Well, listen, we have been 56 minutes, and that's pretty good. So I think we're gonna start to wind this up. I thought it was pretty interesting discussion. We covered a lot, and we went
Yeah.
from 101 up to, I would say, probably.
102.
You think it was 102? I was going to say no,
I'm joking.
201. Maybe the
Yeah,
next,
we'll say 201
maybe
with the AMO material.
sophomore. Yeah, right. Not a senior in college stuff. Sophomore, maybe. Well, everybody, listen. Thank you for coming. We completely appreciate that you came, and I'll see you Thursday night. Jim, you'll be back in a couple of weeks, and I think there'll be, Jim, your next show will probably be with Jennifer, which will be cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
That'll be
you
cool.
guys,
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing that conversation. All right,
And
so
if I can be a little shameless here, please, folks, for those who may not be familiar with my channel, please go check it out. Click on the video tabs. Every video I've ever made is there, including you will find an extended video on the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, as well as all the major oscillatory systems of the planet. And I've got shorter videos as well. So, but
Yeah.
it's Science Talk with Jim Massa. So, yeah.
yeah, basically whatever you want to learn. It's kind of cool. I have to watch them sometimes a couple times, but it's all right.
And I did a very lengthy video on isotopic fractionation, explaining what that is and how we use it to reconstruct past climates. It's a very important tool, and I did a little addendum on it to explain how the ratios work. But I've done a lot of videos that Milankovitch explain what all that is. That I hope to give people a general understanding of a lot of these scientific principles we're always hearing about. You hear about these things. Well, this is what it is. Well, you hear about isotopes. What's that? How's that really used? Well, this is how we use it, and that kind of stuff. As well as bring in, the latest reports that as in peer-reviewed journals. Brain cramp.
And that's a good part because I don't have time. So I go to you, I go to Paul Beckwith. I want to hear and learn about journal articles. All right, guys. At least those kind of journal articles and climate change research and all of the subjects and things that you do. Yes. All right. There we go. I have to say goodnight. I can't sit any longer. Good night, guys. Good
night, folks.
night.
Thanks, Sandy.